Welcome back to Lawmakers on GPB. I'm Donna Lowry. We're going to talk now about the interests of Georgia's businesses when it comes to what takes place here under the Gold Dome. And with me is the president and CEO of the Georgia Chamber, Chris Clark, to talk about that. Thank you for being here.
Yes, ma'am.
What I want to talk about first is how important is it for you to know what's going on for business during these 40 days here during the General Assembly? How important is this?
So it's why we exist, quite frankly. It's why we were created 105 years ago, is to be down here and work with the members of the General Assembly during these 40 days and 40 nights to make sure that we're passing laws and bills that help businesses grow, help the economy grow. In fact, in 2015, after we were coming out of the economic crisis, we asked a group of economists, what's been the greatest motivator? What's helped us spur economic growth in Georgia? And they said it was actually the work of the governor, lieutenant governor, the speaker, and the Georgia General Assembly to set bills, lower taxes, and to have policies in place that stimulate the economy. So what these men and women do down here for 40 days and 40 nights impacts every small business, every large company, every community in the state of Georgia.
Yeah, and one of the first bills to actually go through last week when everybody was in session dealt with something dealing with businesses,
right.
And it's these marketplace facilitators, which basically is allowing Georgia to collect online taxes we haven't been able to collect before.
Right.
Talk about, are businesses in this state ready for that?
I think they're ready for it. We've been having this conversation for almost 5 years now. This is probably the third version of the bill that's been passed. I think we will get it right. We take little baby steps along the way. And so Georgia businesses are ready. They've been ready now for several years. I think the best thing about this bill is it levels the playing field between our small business, our brick and mortar companies all over Georgia, and these big international companies that are selling to Georgia companies or Georgia consumers every day. And so this is bringing in tax dollars that we need to fix our roads and bridges and schools, and that quite frankly it's just to level the playing field and make things even for Georgia small businesses.
So people understand this a little bit. We're talking about, when we talk about third market, we're talking Walmart, we're talking Airbnb, we're talking even the rideshare companies. Right,
and the Amazons of the world, absolutely. Exactly. So this is just requiring them to collect the same taxes that you and I would pay if we went downtown to get our hair cut or to buy a pair of shoes.
Okay, so there are a lot of things going on
yeah.
that will be taking place here at the Gold Dome that will involve businesses. I want to throw out a few of them, a few of the ideas, and see what you have to say about them. Okay. Let's first talk about a possible income tax cut. What are your feelings?
Sure. So we've been in favor of this for the last couple of years. We supported the last income tax cut. And for us, it's more about helping those communities on the border of Florida and of Tennessee where they don't have state income taxes. What we find are companies might be located here, but their executives will drive over the line so they don't have to pay those state income taxes. And so we want them to be in Georgia. We want their kids to go to school here. We want them investing their private time, their treasure here. And so in order to do that, we need to lower our state income tax so that we're more competitive. And so this is not about, a business tax. We're not advocating for that. This is a personal income tax, more money back into your pocket and my pocket. But to us, it's a competitive issue.
Wow. Other states to being competitive against those states who are around the border.
Right. Florida and Tennessee have no state income taxes.
Right.
So it makes it very attractive for me to drive over the line every night instead of staying here. But we want those executives. We want those workers here in Georgia. Let's
talk about how your feelings on reforming the film tax credit.
Sure. And so
a lot of talk about
that. Listen, this is I remember going to see Governor Perdue when I was Deputy Commissioner of Economic Development for the first tax credit in 2004. That year was remarkable. The year before we had one production in Georgia. Louisiana had 13. We passed that first tax credit. The next year we had 13. Louisiana had 1. This year we'll have over 450. And so when we see things like this audit that everyone's talking about, saying that the industry isn't having the impact, I just think that's false. I think if you read that audit, it's very political. It seemed a little bit like a political hit job. I read the new report from the Department of Economic Development that was put out by Georgia Tech, who does most of our economic impacts for this state. And what they said was that you're seeing almost $4 billion spent in Georgia, $8 billion worth of economic impact, tens of thousands of Georgia workers. And more importantly, where that industry is, right? So we went from having, Burt Reynolds film a few movies here, Smokey and the Bandit being my favorite as a kid, way back. And then you got to the point where we're now building production studios here, and you're seeing what Tyler Perry has done there. You're seeing the expansion at Pinewood, at Black Hall. Now what you're seeing is the announcement at Pinewood last week with 2 production companies moving to Georgia to produce more stuff here. And so that ecosystem's maturing. And now what we're going to have is we're going to have the site location done, we're going to have the filming done, and now we're getting to the point where we get the technology, the creative services, the post-production. Now we've got the whole ecosystem. So we're right on the cusp in Georgia of really moving to that next level, of really being able to compete against Canada, London, New York, LA. What we don't need to do is take a step back, right? We don't need to let a politically motivated audit derail what we're doing or send the wrong message. We want to continue to be pro film and entertainment and creative industries in this state.
Don't you see some caps are needed, though?
I think,
and how much would that hurt?
So I think what you're seeing right now are the industry sectors out there, those big studios, they're meeting with the Department of Revenue. They're saying, how do we make this better? How do we have more audits to make sure that what's spent here is getting the credit so that we don't have problems of people spending out of state? So the industry wants to fix the problem. They want to see whatever that is. They're willing to work hard. But what we don't want to do is to get rid of that credit or take a step back in Georgia. That's just unacceptable. You're talking about $9 billion a year through our economy. So let's tweak it. Let's make it work. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to have more resources for the Department of Revenue to make sure we are auditing those productions. If we're going to have 400 plus a year, we're going to need the audit services there to make sure that we're spending those dollars appropriately and we're good stewards of the industry and our tax dollars.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit.
Sure.
And talk about your thoughts on expanding gambling in Georgia.
So, and you just hit me with all the good stuff today.
All the good stuff. That's what you're here for, the good stuff.
So the Georgia Chamber looked at this issue. It took us about a year and a half. When we started the casino gambling discussion a few years ago, we really did a deep dive on what the impact could be and what this means for Georgia. And quite frankly, our members came out very clearly that they believe that the voters of Georgia should have the right to vote on whether or not we want to have gambling and sports betting in Georgia. And so that's our position. Don't let that be a decision that's just made here in the State House. Let the Georgia voters make that decision, just like they did with the lottery in 1992. Give them a voice in that. But I do think it's worth noting particularly when we talk about sports betting, now that the Supreme Court has made that legal, you've got 13 other states have already passed laws. They're allowing sports betting. People in Georgia are engaged in sports betting today, but they're spending those tax revenues in New Jersey and in other states. The other states around us, I think there are 22 other states right now having discussions this year about legalizing sports betting to allow that to happen in their state so they can capture those revenues. And so we think we ought to have that discussion in Georgia. And quite frankly, if we do decide to go that way and the voters of Georgia support it, those new dollars that come in ought to go to education. That's been the position of the Georgia Chamber. Put those back in to the next generation of talent and workforce in Georgia. Okay.
We've got to talk rural transit while you're sitting here.
Sure.
That's an important area as far as the Chamber is concerned.
Sure. So in the bigger context, the larger discussion in Georgia is on the future of freight and logistics and how transit plays a role in that. I think when people use the term transit, they think about just MARTA or the ATL, forgive me, right?
Yes.
But the truth is that you've got literally dozens of transit systems all over Georgia, and they're taking elderly to the doctor. They're taking them to the different resources. You got the bus services in Savannah and others. And so we need to grow that. We need a more robust transit system in Georgia. But we've also got to look long term at the freight and logistics needs of the state, about how we move 1.5 million more cars on the road in the next 10 years, how we grow the ports of Savannah, Brunswick, and Hartsville by 60, 70%. How do you move that around so it's not gridlock in just Atlanta, and you can have other corridors open out there. And so we've had a study committee that's traveled the state this last year, the General Assembly, and I've sat on that with the ports and with the Commissioner of the Department of Transportation. What's the long-term need? Our last meeting, just to handle what we've talked about, not building any new roads, just freight, logistics, you're talking about $2.5 billion more a year for the next 30 years just to keep up with the growth of the state of Georgia. And so we are advocating this year that the General Assembly let us continue that work and do a little more digger deeping to see how you might fund that, what the real numbers are, and to bring that back. So you do have this issue of rural transit that as more people retire, you're going to have to help them get the services that they need. And likewise, we've got to move people around in and around Atlanta and move goods and products around this state too. So a lot of discussion really needs to be had around transportation over the long term.
But no quick fix.
No, there's no quick fix to this. And we passed 2015, we passed HB 170.
Yeah.
That put $1 billion more into the system, and we're seeing the benefits from that today, thanks to a very efficient DOT and a very efficient road construction industry in Georgia, but a lot more work to do.
Yeah, can you briefly talk about your smart decisions plan? I only have a few
Absolutely.
seconds.
We've been working for the last year and a half with a great coalition to look at how do we improve college and career success rates for those first-generation low-income students right now that are just coming into college. And so we'll have a variety of recommendations for the General Assembly this year to help make that easier for kids to go to college, get the financial resources, and be successful.
The feeling is that kids need some help along this area.
Right, just because you graduate doesn't mean you're ready. And so here's a few of the recommendations that we have. One, the average high school student in Georgia, the student to counselor ratio is 1 to 484. And so we think there ought to be more college and career counselors out there to help kids better prepare. We think there ought to be an SAT, ACT day during the week at every school, because right now only 70% of our kids are taking the ACT or SAT, and it's a much smaller percentage for rural kids or children of color. And so we've got to give them, if we can have it during the school day, so make it easier. And then lastly, we're leaving $82 million worth of federal funds for financial aid on the table every year because we're not helping Georgia kids fill out the forms. And so we want to standardize those forms, make it mandatory for Georgia high school students to fill out those federal aid forms.
We definitely have to talk about that more. Some good programs. Can't wait to hear more about them. A lot of people want to know. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us tonight for Lawmakers.